Let's get started. Thanks for the introduction. And you're right, we're going to be talking about securing mobile apps with the Microsoft Identity platform. I work as a PM for Microsoft Identity. I'm a developer advocate. I hope to inspire you to write better and more secure software at the end of this session. And I'm passionate about technology. I love TV too much, especially with the lockdown these days. I watch way too much TV, and I try to weightlift when my body agrees with me. So if you like what you see today, and if you want to learn more about identity, feel free to join us on Tweets. We tend to show stuff around identity on any language, any platform. Sometimes mobile, sometimes web, sometimes desktop. Oh man, this slide is old. It's Mondays and Fridays at 8 a.m. Pacific time, or 4 p.m. UK, 5 p.m. Central European. So if you're in Spain, that'll be 5 p.m. for you. And everything is recorded as well, so you can find us on YouTube if you can't join live. But if you join live, you get a chance to ask questions, submit ideas for topics, or cover stuff that you may be struggling with. So make sure to reach out to us. Now, identity is a little bit of a tricky subject, and I know that it's not the most exciting topic to talk about, but we definitely don't want you to do the wrong thing, because you won't be the first one or the last one that had their data compromised through bad security. So you can see a lot of companies over here. You can see a lot of different enterprises as well. So from pizzas to Adobe to Dropbox, everyone has got it wrong. At some point, they compromise users' data. And as developers, we don't want you to be in that situation. We want you to fall in the pit of success by doing it right. And as you can see here, I don't know if anyone has followed Troy Hunt or follows Troy Hunt. He's an Australian security guy, and he developed this tool called Have I Been Pwned? You can go and register your emails, and if your email is ever found in one of these compromises or security dumps, then you get a nice alert, so you can go and change your password. So hopefully everyone by now is using a password manager, but if you're not, this is a great place to start. And as you can see here, there's a big number. It's almost 10 billion accounts that have been compromised throughout the existence of this tool. And so Troy tries to upload every time there's a new security dump. He tries to upload that and notify you. But what is scary for me is the fact that so many websites have got it wrong, that over 10 billion accounts have made it to this website and in the hands of hackers. So we want to help you implement security in your apps, whether it's a mobile app or an API that your app is calling, and do it right without you having to worry about how you're storing your data, how you implement the security. We don't want you to know about protocols. We implement everything for you, and we give you a nice library to go and build authentication and authorization in your apps. And on our demos today, I will show you how actually to go and do it in a few steps. When we talk about the Microsoft Identity platform, obviously we want to give you the confidence that it is an identity provider that you can rely on. So it's not just you and me. We have over 345 monthly active users and over 200,000 companies, right, that are using Azure AD to secure their solutions. But the number I really want to focus on is the 30 billion logins a day. This is a platform that actually scales with your app. Now, if you have one user, that's perfectly fine. If you have 10 users, that's also fine. And if you have 10,000 users trying to log in at the same time, that is also fine as well. As a developer, you don't have to ever think about how am I going to scale my user database? How am I going to scale my solution to accommodate that? So with 30 billion logins per day, which is an insane number, and I had to actually check with marketing to make sure that this was right, we give you the confidence that the platform will scale with your needs. Now, as a developer, you might be thinking, well, that sounds great, Chris, but how do I get started? And obviously, as a developer, you're going to look first at what you have in your solution. Whether you're in a big company or a small company or an independent developer, you need to be able to leverage something. So if you work for a big company, then chances are you already have an Azure AD somewhere. If you're using Azure, you have an Azure AD. If you are with Microsoft Office 365, then you also have an Azure AD. And if you don't have an Azure AD, you can go and set it up yourself. You can spin up an Azure subscription and do it. The whole point there is that you can leverage what you already have rather than going and looking at external solutions and duplicating the effort and the costs. How easy it is to get started with building authentication into your solutions? That's a good question. Documentation is very important. Samples are very important. And our goal there is to give you the right tools to get started. Does support or integrate well with the existing platform? Yes. The Microsoft Identity Platform targets all the major solutions. So whether you're using .NET or Java or Objective-C, we have both native libraries for all these tools, but we also allow you to bring your own libraries if you want to. And finally, does it support advanced security capabilities? So it's not just the authentication component. It's not just, hey, I need a user to log in with a username and password. It's also the other things like multi-factor authentication that you have to implement yourself. If you ever have to do that, you know that it requires a couple of additional services like emailing and texting and complex solutions to verify this information. Conditional access. Do I allow my users to access my solution from everywhere, or do I want to lock it down to a specific subset, especially if we're talking about enterprise line of business apps? If you are an indie developer or a games developer or anyone that needs to interact with consumers, you still want to give them the tools and the confidence to easily onboard into your platform and use the platform securely. So what we give you with the Microsoft Identity Platform, obviously reduced sign-in friction. We have one place where the users will go, they will provide their sign-in credentials, and they will come back to your solution. And it definitely simplifies the sign-in process because we give you the SDKs, we give you the libraries, we give you the samples. So hopefully as a developer, you can get started very, very quickly. Accessing organizational data. So if you're creating a line of business apps and you want your mobile developers your mobile users to access the data, we give you a very rich API via Graph to allow you to access things like emails and documents and SharePoint, and also things like Azure. So via Azure AD, you can also access all the Azure resources securely as well. Now, complying with IT is very important. As a developer, you might not really care about that, but as an enterprise or as a company that you work for, there is this demand of how do we have accountability about who's doing what, and how do we lock down things? For example, I've been in companies where people have left, employees have left, and 2 years after having left the company, they were still able to access production systems as admins because they never rolled their passwords. They didn't have a good process for securing and removing those accounts once the people left. So if you are using Azure Active Directory in a line of business setup, then as soon as someone leaves and they are removed for the Active Directory, then they won't be able to access any of the apps. So you get compliance with IT. IT can also enforce multi-factor authentication or conditional access to your solutions and provide these without the need for you as a developer to know how to build this stuff. And safeguarding access, again, using our libraries, we can make sure that the users can only access the data that they need to access, and that data is also very, very well protected behind the scenes. You never have to worry about what am I encrypting, what am I hashing, am I using a strong encryption algorithm, and what have you. And we have the ability to scale that as well. So when we talk about the Microsoft Identity Platform, how do you get started? We give you the toolkit to start integrating, but what are the steps that you need to do? And I will highlight the basic steps. There might be more elaborate things that you need to do, but at the very high level, at the 30,000 feet view, there are probably 2 or 3 things that you need to do. First of all, you need to have an Azure AD tenant or an Azure AD B2C tenant. I'll cover what these mean in a bit. But once you have that tenant, somebody in your company manages that, or you own that as a small developer, then you have to create an app registration. That app registration shows the intent to your identity provider, i.e. The Microsoft Identity Platform, that you're going to be using that for something. In this instance, it will be for signing in and signing out users. So the app registration tells the Azure AD that, or the Identity Platform, that you're going to be calling to that platform or enabling users to log in via the app there. It can be a mobile app, it can be a web app, it can be a single page app, it can be a desktop app. You just define the intent, you configure your settings in the app registration, And then you can also do that via the portal. So all the graphical UI stuff that you want to do, or you can automate that via the Graph or PowerShell or Azure CLI. So there's the ability for you to automate and make that part of your CI/CD. Once you do the app registration, once you configure your app registration inside the identity provider, Azure AD or B2C, that's all you have to do on the identity provider side of things. Next, you need to implement the authentication authorization inside your application or applications. For that, you can use libraries, obviously. You can hand roll your own calls to the endpoints that we provide you, but it's a lot easier if you download the libraries. You can also use your own OpenID Connect and Auth to libraries. So you don't have to use ours. If you already have a solution that uses OpenID Connect, then awesome, you can go and use that. So with those libraries, in effect, you're saying my app is going to be calling my Azure AD or B2C to authenticate the users. It's going to acquire tokens, so I don't have to ever store any sensitive information in my application. And once I call those endpoints, which are all OpenID Connect certified via either MSAL or any other OpenID Connect library, then I get my tokens back, and now I can verify that the user is who they say they are, and they can do what they're supposed to be doing. In some cases, you might also be calling other APIs. So you authenticate your users on your front end, which is your mobile app, and then you might want to be calling an Azure function or an API or some Microsoft API like Graph or something in Azure like Azure Storage. In that case, you might need to go back to your app registration, which was on the first step, and configure the app registration to also acquire the tokens that you need to go and speak to these other APIs. But out of the box, and in the minimum thing that you have to set up is an app registration and a library in your code to start calling things. I've talked about Azure AD, so Azure Active Directory, and I've also talked about B2C. So just to clarify, when you decide to build authentication, you have to also understand what the end user is going to be. If you are building a solution or a mobile app for your internal users, your enterprise users, people that have at Microsoft or at Contoso or at MonkeyConf, then in that case, you want to use Azure AD because these are organizational users. This is a line of business app. So that's the one side. These are all internal users. Nobody is from the outside. But if you're building an app for your friend, if you're building an app for like a web app for your cousin that wants to have a forum, or if you're building a game or a mobile app that needs to authenticate external users, let's say Costco needs to allow customers to come in, create an account, and then sign in, buy something, and then check out. In that case, you have to use B2C, business to consumer or business to customer, whatever you want to call it. And this allows external people to come into your app and sign in, create an account, and then interact with the system. So if you're building line of business apps, internal ones, it's Azure AD. If you're building external things, then it is Azure AD B2C. And that's the at a very high level, that's the distinction or the decision they have to make upfront. In some cases, you might want to combine both. You might want to have an app that does both, internal and external, but not as common. So let's say that we have this kind of separation of concerns. And because we are abiding to industry standards, everything follows OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. We also provide you with SAML support and scheme, but most modern solutions these days rely on OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 to acquire tokens, authenticate users, and call other APIs. And because it's all open standard, it means that any library that is built on top of these open standards allows you to authenticate against the system. So if you're using Node, for example, for a very long time, we only had a Passport for Node, which had an Azure AD component there or an extension. Now that we're building a native Node library, you can choose which one you want to use, but you don't have to strip out Passport from your solutions to use MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication Library. Talking about B2C, why is B2C nice? It's because it provides you to customize the solution, obviously. It eliminates the friction. So if you have users that want to come in, they can authenticate using a username and password. That's the minimum requirement. But you as a developer, you might also want to enable social media login. So you might say, well, If you don't want to create a brand new account, you can sign in with your Twitter account, your Twitch account, any OpenID Connect authentication provider. So we had people building solutions with Twitch, where their customers or their users would use their Twitch account to sign in. And that becomes seamless. You only provide one endpoint, the users go there, they sign in, and they come back to your app all authenticated if they succeed. Customizing the user experience, obviously, sometimes you don't want to give your users the feeling that they're actually leaving your app and then they're coming back. So B2C, business to consumer, allows you to customize the pages to look and feel like your app. So it is a lot more seamless, and it provides a consistent experience across the board. And finally, it scales with your customer growth. So you can start with one user, and up to 50,000 users, it's free for B2C. After that, you pay a few pennies or a few cents. But once you hit the 50,000 users, I think it's a good problem to have to pay a little bit for that usage. And with Azure AD B2C, I've already covered this one, but you have external users coming into your B2C endpoints. They authenticate using whatever accounts you enable them to log in. And then from there, you can have the front end calling other APIs or mobile apps or web apps, all secured with the same identity provider. So you have a consistent experience. And I think the next one is a demo, in fact. So let me come out from the presentation and let me spin up I have my emulator here. I think I can make it bigger. Can I? I think I can make it bigger. There you go. So in here, I have an Azure AD B2C app written in Xamarin Forms. And obviously, it's not the most elaborate design, and I'm not a designer, so apologies for the very crude user experience here. But when you launch the app, so let me just close this one down. Oops. Right, so I'm still sharing, right? Yes. So if I okay, so we're gonna launch the app again. I have two apps here. The B2C, I think, is this one. So my B2C, no, that's not the one. What?
So many demos.
So many demos, yeah, I know. Right. Launching the app again. What is this? I don't want to search. Honestly, what happened here? Right, let me my emulator is playing up. Did I launch something here that is thinking that I need to do a search? Yeah, worst case scenario, you know what? I will actually launch it from my there. Okay, so this app will launch the first page is actually requiring you to log in. It's building, and once I'm able to do that, maybe I can go back to slides to show you how this is implemented, and then come back because it might take a while to deploy again. So let's see how it was built and how many lines of code do I need to write. So first and foremost, you need to capture some information for the MSAL library to be able to speak to my business to consumer endpoint. So here you have the tenant ID, which identifies where my B2C is sitting, my tenant name. The client ID is the app registration that we have done, and that corresponds to this one. So we need to provide a GUID. And we have a sign-in policy that points to where my my endpoint is going to be. That sign-in policy in effect says what kind of providers am I going to use in my solution. I can have just username and password as the default, and then I can also add social media logins. So if I go back to the portal, let's see if my app has launched yet. Damn it, what is this one doing? Still building. Very nice. Thank you, Visual Studio for Mac. So inside the portal, once it launches, I will show you. Everything is very slow today. It's one of these days, I assume. So I have my B2C tenant here, and let me make this bigger so everybody can see. So now I'm logging into my B2C tenant, which is a resource that in effect manages all my users and all my app registrations and also all the sign-in capabilities I have enabled. And we'll go and have a very quick look at the sign-in policy. So the app registrations are here. This is where you go and configure or create new app registrations for your solutions. And inside our identity providers, I can define my identity providers once. You can see I have GitHub configured, I've got Google, I've got local accounts, and then I have Twitter. So when I create new user flows, I can define what so we had this one, right? If I remember correctly. So here I can say how many providers I want to use. So I can come in here and say, you know what? For this specific app, I want to use my email sign up, obviously, and then I only want to use Twitter. The other ones I have already configured before are available to me here. So you can create different experiences for your apps depending on what you're building. Let's see if my app is still building. Oh God. I'm installing now. Let's see. It's almost there. I might have to maybe restart my. Oh, there you go.
I think it's launching now, maybe.
Yep, it's launching now.
Yeah.
All this for a sign-in. And I will go back to the code.
Wow.
I think the important bit is how long did it take me to implement these things, right? Rather than like, because if you were to implement this yourself, you had to store the user somewhere. You had to make sure that they're correct. You want to avoid brute force attacks. There's a whole heap of thought that needs to go into implementing secure sign-in, sign-out, and protect from abuse and attacks. So while this one's happening, I'm going to switch back to my slides because, again, I want to show you how long it took, right? So we have the client ID, which I register. We have the sign-in policy. Here we need to define where our information is going to be stored in the iOS keychain, so I don't have to worry about where my token is going to live. And then the authority base, in effect, points to my tenant, right? And then the authority sign-in is my authority base here, plus my sign-in policy. And this information is all documented, so you don't have to really understand what's happening here. Just that the basic information is tenant ID and tenant name and client ID and the sign-in policy, and then everything else builds around it. So the first thing that we are presented with is the login page, and in here we're doing two things. One is as the page starts up on appearing, we want to check whether we already have an authenticated user, because we don't want our users to come and authenticate every single time, because that will be an awful experience. So if they are already authenticated, we grab the first account and then we navigate the user to the login result page. Now, however, this might be the first time they're actually launching. So if this is the first time that they're using the app, we give them a login button, and then in there you notice that we're doing the authentication with a prompt. So we're prompting the user to go and log in on a new window, and then at the back of that, once they authenticate, we push the user again, or we navigate the user to the login result. If there's an exception, we show the exception, especially if the user also decides to cancel the authentication. Let's see, there you go, it's launched. So log in. Anytime. My demo gods are failing me. Oh, did that.
But maybe something wrong with that emulator, because if
It
you
could
take a
be.
look, the central button is still pressed, so it's
Yes.
like it is in a weird state, maybe.
Yeah, it could be. Oh, my emulator is messed up. Maybe I need to restart it, I guess. And I will, because I want to show you the...
So don't worry, take your time. If you want, you can just continue progressing with the slides, maybe while the emulator is restarting. And don't worry, take your time.
Yeah, let me see if I can... Okay, so we deal with the login page and we're done. And once we log in correctly, then it points, oh yeah, maybe I should move that one. So the login result is here. So on the login result, I get the authentication result and that's been passed to my login result page. Here, I need to do a little bit of jiggery pokery, and only because I wanted to capture some of the information, right? So I have a JWT token. This is the token that was returned by the authentication provider, the authentication action, and the identity provider, my business to consumer. And what this one is doing here is that this library allows me to crack open the JWT token and grab the information, i.e. the claims that come back. I never get back the username and the password, right? So the identity provider stores that information securely. What I get back is a token that contains all the information that we captured as part of the authentication process, and that means the name, the issuer, the audience, and also the email of that user. And on the app XAML.cs, so this is all in the CERD library. We have the instantiation of the public client application builder, which in effect it's an object that allows us to authenticate. So all in all, we probably have 50 lines of code, maybe less, to provide authentication. And once I get my token, then it all comes down to how you want to display that information on the page. There are a couple of gotchas that I want to highlight here. So all the code that you saw goes into the CERD solution, or the CERD project. But for the iOS and Android projects, you need to add a couple of lines of code to ensure that the authentication is properly hooked up. So for iOS, you need to override the open URL. And for Android, you need to update the main activity to explain how the authentication is going to be bootstrapped and what happens when on request permission results and on activity result, you get information back. So these are the only overrides. These are also well documented. We also did the stream on this information to show you how to do it. But besides the 30 lines of code that I've showed you before, everything else should be there. Let's see. I'm going to persist and insist on making this work. So this is the business to consumer solution, and I was going to sign in with my Twitter account. So let's see, just to prove that it works. Let's continue with the slides, and I'll come back because I'm conscious of time. I love this slide because it's about, hey, come as you are, bring your own developer tools, services, and platforms. And even though today we're focusing on Xamarin, there's nothing stopping you from using the same libraries across the board. So if you have a mobile app which speaks to a database, a mobile app that speaks to an API that speaks to a database, then the chances are you want to secure, hopefully you're thinking about securing that whole end-to-end solution with HTTPS and passing the appropriate tokens across and securely accessing your backend resources. And that means that the solution could be running on anything. In fact, I love this slide because it has not a single Microsoft technology, and we still work with all these solutions. We have people building solutions to run on AWS that use Microsoft Identity Platform, DigitalOcean. They use their own languages. They don't have to use Visual Studio. They can use IntelliJ or Rider, and they can run on anything. The backend can be serverless, Kubernetes, or bare metal. Doesn't really matter. The authentication experience should be consistent, and authorization experience. But if you're working with Microsoft, obviously, we do provide you with a much better experience. Things like managed identity, service principals, the ability to access a whole slew of data inside the Microsoft 365 platform with Graph, and also the ability to build, to bring things like Power Automate and Power Apps and automate part of the process, the ability to use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, and GitHub to secure your CI/CD pipeline. It makes that whole more wholesome, and I love that that security permeates from the developer desktop or developer machine all the way to production without really changing your code. And that's very important. You don't want to change your code between one environment to another to get that security in place. With mobile apps, because we're talking about mobile here, once those devices are onboarded into the Microsoft Identity Platform with Intune, then your users can also benefit from single sign-on. That's very important. I have many Microsoft applications running on my phone, and I rarely have to sign in. And if I have to sign in, it actually brings me to the Microsoft Authenticator app. I validate that I am who I am there with my face, and it authenticates me, and then I go back to the app without really having to pass passwords. In fact, I don't even remember my domain password. I couldn't, because it's 30 characters long. But if something happened today and I had to sign in with my password, I'll be at the mercy of my password manager, because I rarely use it. Things like hello, Windows Hello, or Fido keys, or single sign-on on the phone make the experience so much better. So even on phones, Intune devices can benefit from the company profile and automatically signing people. We talked about the MSAL libraries. If you build apps prior to MSAL, then please make sure that you migrate those ADAL-based solutions. So Azure AD authentication library, the ADAL library, is actually being sunsetted as of June 2022. So we want to make sure that you are aware of that and you're migrating your app slowly. If you follow the examples and the code that I'm showing you today, you don't have to worry, because it's all built on top of MSAL. So we have everything you need. And I talked about richer experiences there through Graph. Let me see where my emulator is at. One of these days. Let's go. Don't let me down this time. There you go. Now we're cooking. So you can see here I have my sign-in experience, and based on what I configured inside my B2C, as a developer, I didn't have to implement anything. My IT admins configured my B2C side. All I had to do is say what sign-in policy I wanted to use, and now I can either sign in with my email and password. I can sign in with my Twitter. I'll choose Twitter just to prove that social media works. So here, I can't even type my name. Gmail.com. Now you know my Gmail account. So there you have it. And sign in. Obviously, I have to provide my two-factor authentication. So bear with me while see. It's secure out of the box. Ta-da. So I signed in, my B2C took care of that, and now I am presented with my information, my name, the issuer. Obviously, if you're a developer, you probably want to capture just that, and maybe the email, because everything else is just for the sake of showing things. But there you have it. It's running out of the box. And from now on, you can, based on those claims, you can say what the user can do in the app and how far they can go, whether you need to also elevate permissions later on and ask for your authentication if you're trying to access sensitive part of the information. You can also acquire tokens for other APIs and speak to those APIs and what have you. Like 30 lines of code, and off you go. I talked a little bit about Graph. I mentioned Graph before, and I will run the next demo because I'm aware that we're running a little bit out of time. But Graph allows you to access enterprise data. So if you're using B2C, then at this point you can just shut off and then forget what I'm saying, because B2C does not have any graph. It's external users coming to your application, so there's no enterprise data you can share. But if you're building line of business apps, then you can really enrich the experience of your users. And I will give you a very basic example. Some of you, or hopefully many of you, are using Outlook today. So if you're using Outlook in an enterprise environment to send email to other people in the company, then when you try to create a new email and you go to the to find who you want to send the email to, Outlook is trying to be clever and help you optimize your workflow by saying, hey, I know that you speak to certain people throughout the day, so I'll pick the 10 most popular ones in your interactions and present these first. So because I tend to speak to 5 or 6 people most of the time, Outlook is trying to be clever and optimize my experience. This is all a graph, right? So Outlook calls into graph and says, hey, Christos is trying to write an email. Who are his best buddies, or who does he speak all the time? And then that call comes back and says, Christos is working with these 5 people. Let's show them first. So I don't have to go and search for them or remember their email or whatever. This is one way to enrich the developer experience, the user experience. Also interacting with OneDrive. Like, I don't know if anybody has ever tried to do it on mobile. I tried to do it 8 years ago when I was writing a password management app. And interacting with OneDrive was absolutely appalling. Now it's so simple via a graph, because it's one call to write files, to enumerate files. It has simplified quite a lot. You don't have to use a separate API. It's all over REST. So graph is a fantastic way to provide rich experiences for your users. And it pulls all the data from across the board. You can use it in even VR, AR, web apps, bots, daemon apps, and it has a lot of information. You can automate a lot of things, like moving stuff around in your SharePoint or automating experiences. I don't know if anybody watched Build this year, where Scott Hassman and Isaac Levin went on stage to show how they were changing the lights in their room based on their presence on Teams. So if they were busy or on a call or on a conference, they had an app that would listen to that state in graph, or interrogate that state in graph, and then respond and change the lights based on your environment. So you can do some really funky stuff. And next, I want to show you an app that I built, which now uses Azure AD instead of B2C with graph to pull the people I work with. So it's a simple graph call that does that for me. So let's close this one down and let's open the other one. I think the restart probably did good to my solution. So let's launch this one. Now this one requires an enterprise login. So I'm signing in here. It will ask me for my. I've already run it. So remember, see, that's a nice bit here. My MCell library has already cast my token, so I don't have to do it again. Once the token expires, I'll be asked to sign in again. But here I have a list view. Please forgive my awful design. But you can see that it's pulling some of the people I work with in my test tenant, and these are the most popular one, or the ones I use all the time. From a code perspective, let me just jump to the code very, very quickly. It is not this one, it's the other one. And I have multiple instances of Visual Studio for Mac if you've ever done that. So I have a colleague view model. So if I open this one, you notice that I pass my my auth service. If I'm not authenticated, I prompt the user to sign in. And then from there, I take my auth result here, which is my access token to the graph. And I instantiate a graph client. And I'm setting the header so I can make the authenticated call. And from there, I get the people. There's a graph call called me.people. And then it will pull the people I work with most of the time. And I do some transformation to put it into the view, and that's it. So from a code perspective, very similar stuff. Again, we have the main page that that launches and takes me to the sign in, and then from there I launch my people page where I just pass the colleagues. Once the colleague view model gets populated, I pass it in, and I can also log out. And the logout is a single line of code. It takes more code to navigate somewhere else to actually, rather than signing out users. These are the two demos I had. I wanted to very quickly, because I'm aware that I'm way ahead of, way late on time. But there is a new library for .NET Core or .NET 5, and going forward, I suspect that most of the developers out there are probably using some APIs in the back end, or you might be developing a web app plus a mobile app plus some APIs. So the authentication and the communication around these could be trickier in the past. And what we focused on a lot this year was to simplify the experience and make everything much simpler, especially in the .NET space, to the point that you just need one line of code to actually configure your authentication. I don't want to go through that slide too much, but oh wow, copy paste here has messed up my. Let's see. Well, you know what? Let's do a demo. .NET new. I don't think. Yeah, web app. That's us. Auth single org and the name. Oh, templates broken. Fine. I should have tested that before I did it, but just going back, and I think it's the font here that is failing me. It is a very simple call. I don't know why that's broken, but what we've managed to do here is to provide you with a single line of code, which will be services dot add Microsoft Web App Authentication. Maybe I can show it on the web. The library is called Microsoft Identity.web, and it's built on top of MSAL. And if you've ever had to deal with authentication in .NET before, you'll know that it was a little bit of confusing because there was the ASP.NET identity. You would sign in your users, and then you had to call any other services. You had to download and install MSAL. We've wrapped all that for you. So let's see, getting started maybe here. And let's see, web app that signs in users. I will just show you the raw code here because my .NET template is broken. So this is a standard web app, and here is the code that is required to authenticate your users. It's a single line of code. So if you're creating APIs, if you're creating web apps that need to speak to your apps, then we've way oversimplified the authentication process for you. And that's going to be my highlight of the day, finishing with 30 lines of code in mobile and 1 line of code if you're building ASP.NET Core apps today. Let me switch back to StreamYard and see if there are any questions, comments.
So I have been following the chat in Twitch and YouTube, and there aren't any questions. Some comments when you, for example, start up the demo with a big J, and people happy to see how everything is connecting and working.
Yep.
But no big questions. I think that only nice feedback, like, for example, this last one. Thank you very much for it all, Christos. And I think that has been a very interesting session. So let's wait a couple of seconds to see if we receive a question now. If you have any doubts about anything related with the session, now is the moment.
Yeah, and I will actually share all that I've shown you today. It's available on GitHub. So if you want to see how I put these together, I will share the slides later on, and I will also put pointers to my GitHub repo. So in fact, we have a blog post as well that you can go and read through that, explaining how I put everything together. So if you want to follow along and you don't understand what the code is doing, the blog post explains everything, and the repos contain the latest code. So you should be able to go and grab it and run it and follow along to implement your own authentication.
Cool.
Thanks for having me, by the way. Thanks for everyone that sticking along with my my emulator fun. But thank you.
Well, that's happened to all us all the time, you know, and always in the session. I for sure 5 minutes before was working very quickly and very fine. That's always happened. But yeah, don't worry. We have seen that working and without problems, so has been very, very nice.
Nice. So if somebody asked the repo, I will put it on the chat now, and you can share.
Yeah, sure.
And I will make the slides available later on, so you can share them as you see fit. But it is.
you share the link, I can share directly using the MonkeyConf account on all the chats on YouTube and Twitch.